Hey everyone, welcome back to Creepy. So today's video is deeply disturbing. In this video, we're getting into 4 true horror stories from small towns across rural America. These are encounters that happened in isolated communities where everyone knows everyone, but something dark still managed to hide in plain sight. A lot of these experiences are hard to explain, and that's what makes them so creepy. If you guys enjoy this kind of content, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know if you want more videos like this. Alright, let's get into these small town nightmares. My friend Rachel convinced me to go with her in early December 2013, right before Christmas break. I was 21, halfway through college, and she'd just broken up with her boyfriend of 3 years. She needed to get away from campus, away from running into him at parties and the dining hall, and her family had a cabin they rented out near Timber Falls, a tiny town about 2 hours north of where we went to school. The place had maybe 300 people, one main street with a diner and a hardware store, and miles of forest in every direction. We loaded up a Honda with groceries, blankets, and enough wine to last the weekend. The drive took us through winding mountain roads, past the last real gas station, and onto a narrow gravel lane that led to the cabin. It was tucked into the woods, a small 2-bedroom place with a stone fireplace, a wraparound porch, and a view of nothing but trees. The caretaker had left the heat on for us, so when we walked in, it was warm and smelled like cedar and old wood smoke. The first day was perfect. We unpacked, made spaghetti, sat by the fire drinking cheap Merlot, and talked about everything except her ex. That night we fell asleep on the couch watching bad horror movies, which felt ironic later. The next morning Rachel found the note. It was tucked under the windshield wiper of her car, a folded piece of lined notebook paper with handwriting in blue pen. All it said was, "You shouldn't have come back." We stared at it for a long time. Rachel hadn't been to the cabin in over a year. I'd never been there before in my life. We figured it was meant for someone else. Maybe the previous renters, maybe a prank from bored local kids. The caretaker lived 20 minutes away, and we hadn't seen another soul since we arrived. Probably just some weird small-town thing, Rachel said, crumpling the note and tossing it in the trash. But that afternoon, while we were hiking a trail that looped behind the cabin, we found the dolls. There were 4 of them, hanging from a low branch by thin pieces of twine, each one facing the trail. They were the cheap kind you'd find at a thrift store, plastic bodies, matted synthetic hair, glass eyes. Someone had dressed them in scraps of fabric, and their faces were turned toward the path like they were watching. The twine looked new. The dolls swayed slightly in the breeze. Rachel took a picture with her phone. I wanted to leave them there and head back, but she insisted we cut them down. She said it was probably just kids messing around, trying to freak out hikers. We left the dolls in a pile at the base of the tree and kept walking, but the rest of the hike felt wrong. The woods were too quiet. No birds, no rustling, just our footsteps and our breathing. That night, the knocking started. It was around midnight. 2 knocks on the front door, clear and deliberate. Rachel and I were still awake, sitting by the fire, and we both heard it. She looked at me. I looked at her. Neither of us moved. 2 more knocks. Same rhythm, same force. Rachel got up, walked to the door, and called out, "Who's there?" Nothing. She turned on the porch light and looked through the peephole. There's no one there. We checked every window. The porch was empty. No car in the driveway except hers. No footprints in the dirt. We convinced ourselves it was a branch or an animal, even though we both knew what we'd heard. An hour later, the knocking came from the back door. 3 knocks this time, spaced out. We didn't answer. We sat on the couch with the fireplace poker and a kitchen knife, waiting for it to stop. It did after about 10 minutes, and we didn't sleep at all that night. In the morning, we found the footprints. Bare footprints. Human, adult-sized. They circled the entire cabin, passing by every window and both doors, pressed into the cold dirt. But here's what made my stomach drop. It had rained lightly around 4 in the morning. We'd heard it pattering on the roof. The footprints were on top of the wet ground, which meant whoever made them had been out there after the rain, after the knocking stopped, while we were sitting inside in silence. Rachel called the caretaker. He drove out within an hour, a gruff man in his 60s named Douglas, who didn't seem surprised. He walked the perimeter, looked at the prints, and finally said, "You're not the first ones." He told us that 3 years ago, a couple had rented the cabin for a weekend. They'd left in the middle of the night, pale and shaking, refusing to say why. A year before that, a family cut their stay short after their daughter said someone was watching her through her bedroom window. Douglas had always chalked it up to people spooking themselves in the woods, but when Rachel showed him the picture of the dolls on her phone, his face changed. "Where'd you find those?" "On the trail, about a mile back." He was quiet for a long time, then he said, "There was a girl who went missing here in 2005, 10 years old, lived in town. They found her clothes on that trail, folded in a pile, but they never found her." We left that afternoon, packed everything in under an hour, didn't even clean up properly, just locked the door and drove. Rachel's family never rented the cabin out again. A year later, they sold it. I still have the picture of the dolls on my old phone. I've never deleted it, but I've never looked at it closely either. A few months ago, I was scrolling through a forum about unsolved missing persons cases, and I found a thread about Timber Falls. Someone had posted a photo from 2004, a year before the girl disappeared. It showed a birthday party in someone's backyard. In the background, barely visible, were 4 dolls hanging from a tree. The same dolls, the same twine, the same arrangement. Story 2. 2 winters later, in January 2016, when I was 23 and working my first real job out of college, I went back to the mountains. Not to Timber Falls, I'd never go near that place again, but to a different ridge system about 50 miles east, near a town called Ridgeback. My older brother Marcus had just gotten divorced, and he needed to clear his head. He'd been staying on my couch for 2 weeks, barely eating, barely talking, and finally, I told him we should do something. Get out. Breathe. He suggested we rent a cabin for a long weekend, somewhere remote, somewhere he wouldn't have to think about lawyers and splitting furniture and all the ways his marriage had fallen apart. I found a place online, a small A-frame about 4 miles outside Ridgeback, accessible by a gravel road that turned into a dirt track. The listing said it had a wood stove, a generator, and no cell service. That last part sold Marcus on it. We drove up on a Thursday afternoon in early January. The sky was gray and heavy, threatening snow, and the temperature hovered just above freezing. Ridgeback itself was even smaller than Timber Falls, maybe 200 people, a post office, a church, and a general store that doubled as a gas station. We stopped to fill up and grab supplies. The woman behind the counter was friendly enough, mid-50s with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail. When Marcus mentioned we were staying at the A-frame off Old Hickory Road, her smile faded just a little. "You boys be careful up there," she said, bagging our bread and canned soup. "Gets real dark at night." I laughed it off. Marcus didn't say anything. The cabin was exactly what we needed. Small, warm, isolated. We got there just before sunset, unloaded our gear, and Marcus immediately started splitting firewood while I got the generator running. That first night, we cooked chili on the wood stove, drank beer, and played cards by lantern light. Marcus seemed lighter, almost like himself again. We didn't talk about his ex-wife. We didn't talk about much at all. It was enough just to be there. I woke up around 2 in the morning to use the bathroom, and that's when I saw it. There was someone standing at the edge of the trees, maybe 30 yards from the cabin, just standing there, a dark shape. Human-sized. Perfectly still. I was looking out the small kitchen window, squinting into the darkness, and at first I thought it was a tree stump or a shadow, but then I realized the shape was too tall, too narrow. It had the posture of a person. I stood there, frozen, staring. My heart was pounding in my chest. The shape didn't move. After maybe a minute, I grabbed my flashlight and flicked it on, aiming the beam out the window. The light cut through the darkness, swept across the trees, and landed on nothing. Just empty space. Whoever or whatever had been standing there was gone. I didn't wake Marcus. I told myself it was a deer, or my eyes playing tricks, or exhaustion. I went back to bed and barely slept. The next morning, I didn't mention it. We spent the day hiking a loop trail that took us up to a ridge with a view of the valley below. It was cold and clear, the kind of day that makes you forget everything else. We talked a little about his marriage, about what he wanted to do next, about whether he'd stay in town or move somewhere new. It felt good, normal. That night, I saw the figure again. This time it was closer, maybe 20 yards from the cabin, standing near the woodpile. Same posture still, upright, watching. I was brushing my teeth at the kitchen sink when I glanced out the window, and there it was. I didn't hesitate this time. I grabbed the flashlight, went to the front door, and threw it open. "Hey!" I shouted into the darkness. "Who's out there?" Nothing. No movement. No sound. I swept the flashlight across the yard, and the beam landed on the woodpile. The trees beyond, the driveway. Empty. Marcus came up behind me. "What's going on?" "There was someone out there," I said, my voice tight, standing by the woodpile. He stepped outside with me, his breath clouding in the cold air. We walked the perimeter of the cabin, checking for footprints, for any sign that someone had been there. The ground was half frozen, hard to read, but we found nothing. No prints. No disturbance. Just the two of us, and the sound of wind in the trees. "You sure you saw something?" Marcus asked, and I could hear the skepticism in his voice. "I'm sure." We went back inside, locked the door, and tried to sleep. I didn't tell him I'd seen it the night before, too. The third night, it got worse. I woke up around 1 in the morning, not because of a sound, but because of a feeling. That prickling sensation on the back of your neck when you know someone's watching you. I opened my eyes and looked toward the window across from my bed, a small square window with thin curtains we hadn't bothered to close. The figure was right there, pressed up against the glass. Looking in, I couldn't see a face, just the shape of a head, shoulders, the outline of a body blocking the faint moonlight. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to move, to do something, but I was paralyzed. We stared at each other. If it even had eyes for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. Then it stepped back, smoothly, silently. It moved away from the window and disappeared into the darkness. I bolted upright, my heart slamming against my ribs. Marcus! He woke up instantly, already on edge from the night before. What happened? It was at the window. It was right there looking in. This time he believed me. We grabbed our flashlights, our phones, anything we could use as a weapon, and we checked every window, every door. We found nothing. No prints beneath the window, no scratches on the glass, no sign that anyone had been there at all. "We're leaving," Marcus said. "First light, we're gone." I didn't argue. We packed in silence, barely speaking, our movements quick and tense. We didn't sleep. We sat in the main room with the lights on, the wood stove burning, waiting for dawn. Every creak, every gust of wind, every shadow made us jump. Around 4 in the morning, we heard it. Footsteps on the porch, slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth across the wooden planks, not trying to hide, not trying to break in, just walking, letting us know it was there. Marcus stood up, gripping a cast-iron skillet. "I'm done with this." He went to the door, unlocked it, and threw it open. I was right behind him. Flashlight raised. The porch was empty. But there, at the far end near the steps, was a set of muddy boot prints, men's boots, size 10 or so, caked in dark, wet mud. They started at the edge of the porch, walked the length of it, turned, walked back, and then ended. Just like that. No trail leading to or from the cabin. No explanation. We left 15 minutes later, throwing our bags into the car and tearing down that dirt road like something was chasing us. We didn't stop until we hit the main highway, 20 miles away, and even then Marcus was white-knuckled on the steering wheel. 2 months later, I was scrolling through local news online and found an article from 2014. A hiker had disappeared near Ridgeback, on Old Hickory Road. They'd found his camp abandoned, his gear still there, his truck parked at the trailhead. No signs of struggle. No body. He'd been staying in a small cabin the same A-frame we'd rented. The article included a quote from the lead investigator. "It's like he just walked away and never came back." I showed Marcus the article. He read it in silence, then closed his laptop. We've never talked about that weekend since. By 2019, when I was 27, I thought I'd left all that fear behind me. I'd moved to a bigger city, gotten into a graduate program, and spent 3 years in therapy working through what had happened in Timber Falls and Brookhaven. My therapist called it hypervigilance, maybe some PTSD. I called it being careful. Either way, I avoided small towns, isolated places, anywhere that felt too quiet. But that summer, my best friend from high school, Jenna, was getting married in her hometown, a place called Ashford Mills, population 600, tucked into a valley about 4 hours from where I lived. The wedding was at her parents' property, a sprawling piece of land with a renovated barn, gardens, and a guest cabin they'd built for family visits. Jenna asked if I'd come up a few days early to help with setup, and I couldn't say no. She'd been there for me through everything. I owed her this. I drove up on a Wednesday in late June, the kind of perfect summer day that makes you forget bad things can happen. The roads wound through farmland and forest, past hand-painted signs for fruit stands and antique shops, and eventually I turned onto the gravel drive that led to Jenna's family property. Her parents greeted me with hugs and lemonade, and Jenna gave me a tour. The barn where the ceremony would be, the tent for the reception, and the guest cabin where I'd be staying, about 100 yards from the main house, at the edge of a field. The cabin was small and charming, one open room with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a double bed under a window that looked out toward the tree line. Jenna's mum had left fresh flowers on the table and homemade cookies in a tin. It felt safe. It felt normal. The first 2 days were busy and good. We strung lights in the barn, arranged flowers, taste-tested the catering, and stayed up late drinking wine and laughing about high school. I barely thought about the past. I barely thought about anything except being there for my friend. On Friday night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stayed up reading in the cabin. It was just after midnight when I heard the knocking. 3 knocks. Clear, deliberate. Right on the cabin door. My stomach tightened. I put the book down and stared at the door, my pulse already picking up. It was late. No one should be out here. "Jenna?" I called. "That you?" No answer. 3 more knocks. Same rhythm, same force. I got up slowly, my legs shaking, and walked to the door. I looked through the peephole, but it was too dark to see anything. I called out again, louder this time. "Who's there?" Silence. I stood there for a long moment, debating whether to open it, and finally I turned on the porch light and cracked the door open, keeping the chain lock engaged. The small porch was empty. The field beyond was dark and still. No cars, no people. Just crickets and the distant sound of wind. I closed the door, locked it, and told myself it was nothing. Maybe a branch, maybe an animal bumping into the wall. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep well. The next morning I mentioned it to Jenna while we were setting up chairs in the barn. She laughed it off. "Probably a raccoon or something," she said. "They get into everything out here." I wanted to believe her. That night, Saturday, the knocking came again. 3 knocks, just after midnight. I was already in bed this time, half asleep, and the sound jolted me upright. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and went to the door. I didn't open it this time. I just stood there, listening, my heart hammering. 3 more knocks. Go away, I said, my voice shaking. I'm calling the police. The knocking stopped. I waited, barely breathing, and then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps walking around the side of the cabin, crunching through the gravel. They moved along the wall, past the bathroom window, past the kitchenette, and stopped right outside the bedroom window. I turned slowly, my phone light trembling in my hand, and looked toward the window. The curtains were drawn, but I could see a shadow through the thin fabric. Someone was standing there. Right outside, I could hear them breathing. Or maybe that was me. I don't know. I ran to the main house. I didn't care that it was past midnight, didn't care that I was in my pajamas. I pounded on the door until Jenna's dad answered, half asleep and confused, and I told him someone was outside the cabin. He grabbed a flashlight and a shotgun, and we went back together, me, him, and Jenna's older brother, Kyle. The cabin was empty. The porch, the field, the woods, nothing. But when Kyle walked around the side of the building, he called us over. There were boot prints in the soft dirt beneath the bedroom window, fresh and clear, pressed deep like someone had been standing there for a while. They led away from the cabin, across the field, and into the trees, where they disappeared. Jenna's dad called the sheriff. A deputy came out, took a report, searched the property, found nothing. He said it was probably someone passing through, maybe a drifter, and that they'd increase patrols in the area. I spent the rest of the night on Jenna's couch in the main house. I didn't go back to the cabin. The wedding was beautiful. I smiled in all the photos, danced at the reception, gave a toast that made Jenna cry. But the whole time, I felt like I was being watched. Every time I looked toward the tree line, every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me. I left right after the reception ended, didn't even stay for brunch the next morning. I made up an excuse about work and drove 4 hours home in the dark, checking my mirrors the whole way. 2 weeks later, Jenna called me. Her voice was tight, careful. I need to tell you something, she said, about the cabin. My chest tightened. What about it? She hesitated, and I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. My mom didn't want to say anything before the wedding, didn't want to freak you out, but the last person who stayed in that cabin was my aunt. About 2 years ago, she left in the middle of the night, said someone kept knocking on the door, that she saw a man standing in the field watching her. We thought she was overreacting, maybe drinking too much, but after what happened to you... Jenna, I said quietly, why didn't you tell me? I didn't think it was real. I thought she was just, is she okay, your aunt? She's fine, she just won't come back here. Ever. I asked Jenna to send me her aunt's number. When I called, the woman answered on the second ring, and I could hear the recognition in her voice when I told her who I was. You stayed in the cabin, she said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, and you heard it. Yeah. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I saw him once, clear as day, standing at the edge of the field, just before dawn. Tall, wearing dark clothes. He didn't move. He just stood there, looking at the cabin, and when I blinked, he was gone. Who is he? I asked, even though I knew she wouldn't have an answer. I don't know, she whispered, but I think he's been there a long time. I haven't been back to Ashford Mills. Jenna doesn't blame me, but things are different between us now. Last I heard, they stopped renting out the cabin. Jenna's dad boarded up the windows and put a lock on the door. No one stays there anymore. Story 4. Last fall in October 2025, I went back to small towns. Not by choice. My sister Amy and her husband bought a house in a place called Millerton, about 2 hours from where I lived. Population maybe 400, one stoplight, the kind of town where the grocery store closed at 6, and everyone went to the same church. Amy had just had her first baby, a daughter named Claire, and she was drowning. New mom exhaustion, postpartum anxiety, her husband working long shifts at the hospital in the next county over. She called me crying one night and asked if I could come stay for a week, just to help out, to give her a break. I didn't want to go. I'd spent years avoiding places like Millerton, but Amy was my sister, and Claire was my niece, and I couldn't say no. I drove up on a Saturday in mid-October when the leaves were turning and the air had that sharp autumn cold. Amy and her husband lived on the edge of town in a 2-story farmhouse they'd gotten for cheap because it needed work. It had good bones, they said. Hardwood floors, a big kitchen, a wraparound porch, and 5 acres of land that backed up to state forest. It was isolated but beautiful, the kind of place that looked perfect in daylight. Amy met me at the door with Claire on her hip, both of them exhausted. The baby was 2 months old, colicky, barely sleeping. Amy's hair was in a messy bun, her eyes ringed with dark circles, and she looked like she might cry from relief when I walked in. "Thank you," she said, hugging me with one arm. "I just need sleep. That's all I need." I took Claire, told Amy to go upstairs and rest, and spent the afternoon walking laps around the living room, bouncing the baby, singing quietly. The house was warm and cluttered with baby gear swings, blankets, bottles everywhere. It felt lived in, normal. That first night was fine. Claire woke up every 2 hours, and I handled the feedings and diaper changes while Amy slept. Around 3 in the morning, I was standing by the kitchen window, rocking Claire back to sleep, when I noticed how dark it was outside. No street lights, no neighbors, just the black outline of trees against the sky. The second night, I heard the footsteps. I was in the guest room on the 1st floor, Claire asleep in a bassinet next to my bed, when I woke to the sound of someone walking on the porch. Slow, heavy steps, moving from one end to the other, back and forth. I sat up, my heart already pounding, and listened. The footsteps stopped right outside my window. I got up carefully, trying not to wake the baby, and crept to the window. I pulled back the curtain just an inch and looked out. The porch was dark, empty, but I could swear I'd heard something. In the morning, I asked Amy if they had animals that got on the porch at night. Raccoons, possums, anything. "Not that I've noticed," she said, distracted, bouncing Claire on her knee. "Why? I thought I heard something last night." Footsteps. She looked at me, and something flickered across her face. "You heard it too." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Amy glanced toward the hallway, like she was checking to make sure her husband wasn't listening, then lowered her voice. "I've been hearing it for about 3 weeks. Footsteps on the porch, mostly at night. Sometimes knocking." I told myself it was the house settling, or animals, or just me being sleep-deprived and paranoid. But if you heard it, did you tell your husband? He thinks I'm imagining it. He works nights half the week, so he's not here when it happens. We stared at each other for a long moment. I wanted to leave right then, pack my stuff, and drive home, but I couldn't abandon my sister. Not with a baby, not when she looked this scared. That night, the knocking started, 2 knocks on the front door, just after midnight. Amy and I were both awake. She was nursing Claire in the living room, and I was making tea in the kitchen. We both froze when we heard it. "Stay here," I said, and I walked to the front door, turned on the porch light, and looked through the peephole. Nothing, just an empty porch and the dark yard beyond. I opened the door, keeping the chain lock on, and called out, "Hello." Silence. I closed the door and locked it. Amy was pale, clutching Claire against her chest. "It's getting worse," she whispered. "It used to just be footsteps. Now it's knocking." The knocking came again an hour later, this time at the back door. 2 knocks, deliberate and clear. Then, 10 minutes after that, at the side door off the mudroom. Always 2 knocks. Always when we were in a different part of the house. By 3 in the morning, neither of us had slept. We sat together on the couch with all the lights on, Claire between us, waiting for dawn. When Amy's husband came home from his shift at 7, we told him everything. He walked the perimeter of the house, checked for footprints, found nothing. He was frustrated, worried. but I could tell he thought we were overreacting. Maybe we should set up a camera, he suggested, just to see if anything's actually out there. He mounted a motion-activated camera on the front porch that afternoon and another one facing the backyard. That night, we watched the live feed on his phone, all three of us crowded on the couch, waiting. At 12:47 a.m. the front porch camera picked up movement. A figure walked into frame from the left side of the screen tour, wearing dark clothing, moving slowly. It walked across the porch, stopped in front of the door, and stood there, just stood there, facing the camera for a full minute. We couldn't see a face. The image was grainy, the figure backlit by the porch light, but we could see the shape of a person. Then it turned and walked off screen. Amy's husband called 911. Deputies arrived within 20 minutes, searched the property, found nothing. No footprints, no tire tracks, no signs anyone had been there. They took the camera footage as evidence and told us to call if it happened again. But the worst part came 3 days later. I was playing with Claire in the living room, holding her up so she could see out the window, when she started making sounds, those little baby coos and gurgles. And then, clear as anything, she said, "Man." I froze. Claire was 2 months old. She shouldn't be saying words yet. "What did you say, sweetie?" I whispered, even though I knew she couldn't answer. She looked toward the window, smiled, and said it again. "Man." I looked where she was looking. The yard was empty, but my skin was crawling. That night, I told Amy what had happened. She went pale, set down the bottle she'd been washing, and said, "She's been doing that for a week, looking at windows, at doorways, smiling and saying, 'Man, I thought I was hearing things.'" We left the next morning. Amy, Claire, the baby gear, everything. We packed it all into 2 cars and drove to my apartment in the city. Amy's husband stayed behind to list the house, to deal with the mortgage, to figure out what to do next. They sold it 2 months later at a loss and moved into a rental closer to the hospital. Amy doesn't talk about Milton anymore. She doesn't talk about the footsteps or the knocking or what Claire saw. But sometimes when we're together and Claire looks toward an empty doorway and smiles, I see Amy's face go pale, and I know she's thinking the same thing I am. Whatever was on that porch, whatever Claire saw, it wasn't just at the house. I think it followed them.